Nowadays, anime is everywhere, and you can virtually go to any streaming service that you want, and they will have a plethora of anime for you to choose from. Recent and old school anime, and there's even services like Crunchyroll that deliver brand new episodes just after they premiere in Japan. We have come a long way in the past few decades, and anime went from being this niche and obscure entity to being pretty much accepted and promoted everywhere that you go. I remember video stores having their tiny little 4-foot section of anime far away, tucked in the back, and all the weird looks that you'd get for going to check it out. Well, part of that might have been because they also always had some 18-plus material mixed in, but that's besides the point. Back in the mid-90s, there was only a handful of anime that had made its way over to the States. Movies like Akira and Ghost in the Shell that were very highly critically acclaimed, but still never really aired on television. In the days before streaming services and the internet, you had to watch whatever the cable networks decided to show you. And the action cartoons that we did get were homemade, and they were good, but we didn't quite know what we were missing out on. I remember early one morning turning on the TV to a channel I don't even remember what it was, and seeing something that blew my little 7-year-old mind and changed me forever. It was an episode of Dragon Ball Z, specifically an episode called Pendulum Room, which featured a handful of the secondary characters training for the oncoming battle with the Saiyans. Of course, I knew nothing about the show at the time, so I thought these were the main characters, but the style, the intensity, the powers, the fighting, it all captivated me because I had never seen anything like it before. What was this new and exhilarating thing that I was watching? Where did it come from? And how on earth could I see some more of it? For those of you that don't know, the first 2 seasons of Dragon Ball Z were released at once in the US and originally aired in syndication, which means that particular channels got it and they aired it whenever they wanted to. And since anime wasn't really known here yet and Dragon Ball Z itself was pretty obscure, channels just decided to slap it anywhere, like at 6 a.m. or even past midnight. They essentially had zero confidence in it, and it was just there as a space waster. But then something changed. On March 17, 1997, the Cartoon Network channel set up an afternoon block of action and adventure-oriented shows that would be called Toonami. They created this thing where when the block started, a host, which was the character of Moltar from Space Ghost, which was a very old Hanna-Barbera cartoon show in itself, he would stand in a room and pull levers and begin the next show, as well as talking to the audience in between shows. It was this unique idea that would help it feel like a communicative event each day that you tuned in, and that only got expanded on later. Originally, they just threw whatever shows they had on the block, and a lot of them were older American cartoons like Johnny Quest and Thundercats. But 1 year later, in 1998, since the other channels had no idea what to do with it, and since Toonami needed action shows to fill the block, they gave Dragon Ball Z to Toonami. And then, everything changed. Airing Dragon Ball Z in the afternoon right after kids got out of school on Toonami is perhaps the biggest game changer of all time when it comes to anime and its popularity in the West. Yes, at this point, Pokemon was around and already immensely popular, but Dragon Ball Z felt like an older kid's show. It was way more violent, the themes were deeper, and the characters had development and personality beyond anything that we had seen before at that time. Dragon Ball Z introduced us into this world with larger-than-life, unstoppably strong villains, and characters that train their asses off to face these threats. Unlike American shows, DBZ had long-form narratives that continued episode to episode and week to week. It wasn't just a one-off villain for one episode, but an entire story arc that took months to tell. It made you excited to get home every day as quick as you could to watch the next episode, only so that you could go to school the next day and discuss it with all your other nerdy friends that were also watching it. And at first, the only DBZ episodes that we had were those first 2 seasons. And when season 2 ended with Goku arriving on Namek, it would go back to the arrival of Raditz. And this would persist for some time. Basically what was happening is it was building up popularity to the point where the channel had to request new episodes, and that is the original reason why we even got a season 3. There was a time where that might have not have happened, but Toonami made it that popular. And when we finally got those new episodes on September 13th, 1999, it was this big event called Z-Day, and it was probably the hypest shit after waiting nearly 2 whole years for some new episodes. But within those 2 years, Toonami itself also advanced quite a lot. With the success of Dragon Ball Z, it called for more anime to be added to the block of shows, and this is what brought more attention and love to this new style of animation. Shows like Sailor Moon and Ronin Warriors were also added to the lineup, both of which have become classics in their own right, and Sailor Moon especially going on to have arguably a comparable legacy to Dragon Ball Z. Also, this was not an anime, but I do want to give a shout out to this CGI series called Reboot. It looks god-awful compared to today's standards, but at the time, it was actually a really fun show to watch, and it had a lot of references to R-rated movies and horror movies that kids would have never heard of, like The Evil Dead. It was some good stuff. Toonami was also revamped, getting rid of Moltar as the host and adding in an original character named Tom, this little robot guy that traveled around on a spaceship called the Absolution, usually walking to the command center at the start of Toonami and then starting up the daily shows. But it was so much more than just that. Toonami felt like an experience. It wasn't just a block of shows, but it made you feel like you were part of it. Not only would Tom talk and introduce the next episode, but during the commercial breaks and in between shows, there would be various promos put together that gave encouraging talks about life. There would be these AMVs that they would play that included clips and dialogue from a variety of the shows and put them all together in what felt like this atmospheric and existential outing that would have your childhood self reflecting on your life and contemplating where it was going to go into the future. In fact, a lot of these early Toonami AMV promos were used in direct inspiration for a lot of people on YouTube nowadays that specifically make that kind of content. But more than that, Tom knew what he was talking about.
Anger can be a motivational tool.
Stop whining and let's get back to work.
Rage can hold you back. You have to turn it into something positive.
I've got to keep pushing go on because I know he can reach a new level.
And as a kid, especially in the 90s and early 2000s, anime was still not considered cool. Despite the popularity, when you went to school, most kids would still bully and pick on you for enjoying it. But having a host like Tom gave some validity to it because it felt like the people that were making Toonami behind the scenes weren't just putting on whatever, but actually took the time to know what the shows were about and be able to discuss and comment on them during the promos. It was this little piece of validation that other networks and other places at the time just weren't giving you. Also, almost all of the non-AMV style promos were narrated by Peter Cullen. This guy was made famous by doing the voice of Optimus Prime from Transformers.
An invincible samurai, Kenshin Himura, walks the path of death and destruction. He is known as Hidokiri Batosai, the Manslayer.
And hearing that voice talk about your favorite anime combined with the music that they'd place in the background, seriously, nothing else could hype you up more for the experience than those promos that Toonami made at that time. Whatever editors they had working for them absolutely blew it out of the park, and it's one of the most memorable things about Toonami. As Toonami progressed, it also picked up more legacy anime like Gundam Wing, the first Gundam series to be popularized in the US, and still to this day holds such a nostalgic value for me and many people. Also wild that out of all the Gundam shows, this was the first one to be chosen. Not just because you have a bunch of missing lore, but also this series is deeply complex and political, and yet its core fan base was 10 to 13-year-olds. But hey, whatever. Wing Zero was dope. Look at that beam cannon. Yeah, it's fucking awesome. Next, Toonami got the various Tenshi Muyo series, which, despite having a lot of action, is actually technically a harem series. You know, the kind of show where there's about 6 to 7 female characters that all want to bang one male character. And I do believe, outside of streaming services, this still is the only harem anime to air on television in the US. By the way, Tenshi rocks. Definitely give it a shot if you've never seen it. There's actually 3 original Tenshi shows, Tenshi Muyo, Tenshi Universe, and Tenshi in Tokyo. Each one takes the same exact characters but creates its own take on the lore and the story. You can't really go wrong with any of them, but I would recommend Tenshi Universe as the best. Outlaw Star was another one that was added that still holds up very well. A 26-episode space western filled with bounty hunters, psychics, living spaceships, and a naked girl in a tank. And somehow Toonami got away with that considering it was geared towards kids, but hey, none of us complained. And as time went on, more and more were added to the roster. We had Big O, Rurouni Kenshin, Yu Yu Hakusho, G Gundam, the original Dragon Ball. Yeah, so long story short, Dragon Ball Z actually aired first because they assumed the action would be easier to market, and a lot less perverted humor to edit out from the Master Roshi antics of the original Dragon Ball. And yes, all the shows on Toonami were edited down, but we didn't care at the time. I don't think most of us really knew. And still, they got away with some wild stuff, all things considered. Eventually, we had Toonami branch off into other time slots as well. There was the Midnight Run, and before Adult Swim was taking up this late night time slot, Toonami aired from midnight to 1 a.m. playing uncut episodes of Dragon Ball Z and Gundam Wing. So if you were cool enough to stay up super late, you got to see just a little bit more blood and a couple of curse words, and let me tell you, it was fucking awesome. The Rising Sun was Toonami's version of Saturday morning cartoons, starting at 9 a.m. to noon. And here's where Toonami may have done its greatest feat of all time. It took the Garlic Jr. arc of Dragon Ball Z, a very short filler segment that most fans think is the worst moment of the franchise and often skip it, and with the promos and air dates made it seem like the hypest shit to ever happen. Honestly, this was a brilliant marketing plan.
This Friday at 4, Toonami belongs to a pint-sized madman. You want to see what real strength is?
But of course, nothing that good can last forever. The Toonami I knew changed a lot over time, moving eventually completely away from weekday afternoons strictly to Saturday nights. And though great content kept coming, we were now entering a time where anime was no longer this exotic, strange, and mesmerizing thing if you were lucky to find it. Now it was getting a little more mainstream. And I feel like the usefulness of Toonami, introducing us to so many great shows, was just slowly fading over time. Because now other networks were getting anime as well. Now some of the best shows had already come and gone, and not the lightest of reasons, but a large portion of the Toonami fanbase had grown up. We were no longer coming home after school, but going into the world to start our own adventures. And many of us using the same lessons and morals that many of these shows taught us over the years, along with the motivational speeches given by Tom himself. Toonami shaped an entire generation of people, and if it hadn't been there to not only show us this new world, but also remind us that we were not alone, maybe we wouldn't have made it as far as we have now. I know a lot of things are better now in terms of finding, watching, and enjoying anime. It's much better to be in charge of what you want to watch, when you want to watch it, choosing if you want sub or dub, and all of that stuff, but something about it also feels a little less personal. You had to be at the TV at 5 p.m. for that new DBZ episode, and you had to wait for the new seasons. But along the way, you were growing up, and as harsh and cold as the real world was, there was only this little block of time where you could escape for just a few hours, watch your favorite characters persevere, and take what you saw and bring it with you into that next day. Thank you, Toonami, for being there and giving a whole generation of kids something that we will remember for a lifetime and that can never be replicated.